Welcome to Hunden Happy Hour, where we bring you the stories behind transformational destination real estate development and the people who make them happen. I'm Rob Hunden, CEO and founder of Hunden Partners, and we've forged a development playbook over decades of complex public, private, and nonprofit real estate and destination development. With me today is Steve Hammerly, Executive Vice President of Development Advisory Services here at Hunden Partners. And in today's episode, we're going to talk about the role of city government in the process of strategic economic development and placemaking. Here to tell Carmel, Indiana's story is Nick Weber, Chief of Staff to Mayor Sue Finkam.
Hi, Rob. It's nice to be with you and Steve today.
Welcome, Nick. You've been Chief of Staff since May of 2025, and you've held high-level private and public sector positions before your current role. So tell us about those positions, both in Carmel and in Indianapolis. Just give us the story arc of your career. People are always fascinated by that.
I don't know if my story is that interesting, but I'm happy to share it. About 30 years ago, I got interested in what someone could do and how they could make a contribution to their community through public service. So I started with a well-timed internship when I was still in college and have been trying to leverage that every day for the last 3 decades. I have spent time at the state level here in Indiana, obviously local government where I am now, and have been at other times in my career, and at the federal government. So I sort of feel like I've touched all the levels. I've also worked in the judiciary, legislative, and executive branches. So if there's a way to cover the waterfront in local government and state and federal government, I think I've done it. I got interested in government service as a way to give back, as a way to be a contributing member of society. I came from a high school that had an ethos of men and women for others, and I always took that very literally and very seriously. And I feel like we're all put here for a higher purpose, and that purpose should be to help one another. Public service has been largely the avenue which I've pursued that. It didn't hurt. I met my wife in public service as well, so I'll always have a fondness for public service for that reason. I worked for Steve Goldsmith when the years still started with 19, and that was my first foray into local government. It was tremendously enlightening. I had the good fortune of meeting you way back in those days.
That's right.
Worked together a little bit. So it was tremendously important and foundational for me. And I went on to go to Washington, D.C. and work on Capitol Hill. I worked for a United States Senator for 7 years, including being a Capitol Hill press secretary. Notably for the bad luck that it is, I was on Capitol Hill for September 11th, for the anthrax attacks, and for the D.C. sniper. So it was a dramatic couple of years for me and everybody else who was in that zip code. But we survived. We made it through. Came back to Indiana. Ended up in local government again. What I call my second tour of duty with Mayor Greg Ballard. I was his deputy mayor for economic development, and that was really the pivot point in my career. I've been doing communications largely in the first kind of half of my career. Then I pivoted into economic development for the second half. Worked for Greg Ballard doing economic development, and then almost a decade and a half in the private sector, working for clients, communities all throughout the country around economic development issues, around helping plan what they can do with the tools that they have at their disposal, trying to be as creative as possible. Obviously, resources are always limited, so what can you take that you've learned from every past project you've ever put together or been a part of, and bring it forward to a community that's maybe just working on this for the very first time. Terrific career, terrific opportunity. I loved it. Didn't expect, frankly, to come back into government for my third tour, but Carmel, Indiana came calling, Sue Finkam specifically. It was just an offer that I couldn't pass up.
When we talk about sort of a playbook forged over decades of real world experience with all the highs and lows that brings with it, you and I have intersected all along the way. And so it's really awesome to see how your career has, come in and out of government, private sector, public sector, but always with that sort of, like you said, the ethos of being as creative as possible, to learn from the mistakes of the past, use you sort of write the playbook as you go, but find those creative tools to help make really difficult things happen in economic development, placemaking, place development, and all of that. So I'm so looking forward to this conversation today because it's like sort of old home week when we talk about going back 30 years.
We can make references that only you and I will get.
That's right.
That's part of the joy, right?
Well, that's absolutely right. I remember one of the quotes that I think Steve Goldsmith said was like, if we don't hire lawyers to tell us what not to do, we hire lawyers to tell us how we can do things that everyone else says we can't. So that whole mindset of creativity to just get things done for the people that you're representing and that you're working for, so you can make the place you are a better place to live, work, play, and visit. That's what we're all about, and doing it as efficiently and as effectively as possible. So we've been really grateful to, I'm originally from Carmel, Indiana, so maybe some people that are watching this don't know that. And I also worked in the Goldsmith administration. So you and I go way back, and the fact that you're working in Carmel, in a place that I've lived for many, many years, and my parents still live there, even though I've been in Chicago for almost 30 years. I had not had the chance to really work in Carmel until like the last 4 or 5 years. And then with the new administration, you all came along, and there were some opportunities and challenges that you inherited, as any new administration does. There were some great things, obviously a legacy of great placemaking under the former mayor, who was a 5-term mayor, I think, or more. And now you have new things to solve and opportunities to sort of grab at. So when we talk about that, that's where I think Steve and our practice comes into play with how we were all reintroduced to each other and the new mayor. So let's talk about the CNO campus, which happened to be the old Conseco headquarters where I interned back in 1993 as a college senior in their capital markets and bond desk. So that was kind of like a prelude to the bond bank that I worked in later. But now that's all vacant and needs to be redeveloped. It's a huge campus. So talk about the setup.
Carmel, Indiana, you alluded to it. We're a great community. We've been built up over the last 3 or so decades. The previous administration really put Carmel on the map and made us known for lots of things. Many people watching might know us for the roundabouts. We have more roundabouts in Carmel, Indiana than any other city in the United States, and it's not even close. But we also are a terrific place to live. If you were to Google best places to live in the United States, whatever list you come up with, Carmel's probably on it, and it's more likely at the top than not. And that's really part of the efforts that have occurred in this city over the years. And it started with this sort of core development. How could we reclaim the main street? How can we reclaim the industrial core, the physical center, if you will, the downtown of Carmel? And it's been an amazing build out, a dense urban walkable environment that is really the envy of any other sort of suburban style city. The next tier of that, what you alluded to when we took office, was that's not the only area in our community that needs redevelopment. We have an area of which CNO is part that is kind of the time capsule of office development of the 80s, right? It's a little slice of how things were done 40 plus years ago. And it's large buildings in a sea of parking lots and clustered together with few services and nothing walkable, not even really the infrastructure for walking, if there was even anything there. And that became the new issue for us to focus on, not to get rid of or declare victory with what the city had been committed to for 30 years. Still opportunities there in that part of our community. But this is really kind of the frontier for us to work on. I think it's a frontier many cities share, quite honestly. These large office parks, and in the CNO case, a single owner office park, exist right all across the country. They're desperate for new uses. They're desperate for opportunities, future opportunities. And what cities are struggle with is what could those opportunities be? And that's really where Hunden Partners sort of stepped into the breach, right? Did the things that we're not capable or really qualified to do.
Yeah, so you had sort of developed a kitchen cabinet of sorts of real estate folks that you had known over the years, and economic development folks that you invited us to. And these were folks that you and I had gone back 30 years in different development roles. And so as part of that then transitioned into needing sort of a formalized study to figure out, well, given what we want to become and what we're trying to achieve, but also market realities, it was sort of a mix of hopes, dreams, and market realities all lined up. So the mayor had some questions that she wanted answered, to be answered about venues that she had in mind, some international or conference venues. So I'd love to have you set that up with, sort of what the key questions were, and then I'll turn it to Steve to talk about how we sort of went through that process to assess the opportunity there.
The kitchen cabinet is an important piece of this, and I'm glad you mentioned it. I like to think the gray hair should be good for something, and what it's good for is being able to ask people to, hey, would you sit around and help me think about a problem? And we were fortunate to be able to do that. And again, I think that translates to lots of communities. I think those folks exist all over the place who want to see their community improve and be better. But you're exactly right. Sitting around, sort of talking about the art of possible. What could happen, what should happen, what do we want to happen, right? Kind of the three big questions. And then it morphing into something more substantive. And it really comes down to there's what you want and there's what can work. And, for communities that don't do a lot of projects, understanding what the market can bear, I think is tricky, or at least trickier. We're fortunate to have a fair bit of deal flow in Carmel, projects that we work on. So that keeps us kind of grounded into what the basics of a project need to be for it to work. But without that, you can just be sort of, tilting at windmills and hoping things can happen when there's really no basis for that. There's no demand. The capital doesn't exist. The market doesn't exist. It's not mature enough, whatever the challenges might be. And that's the specialization that you and the team had really sort of plugged that hole, right? It really provided us with that important cog to say, these things can happen, these things can happen. It grounds expectations, it sets parameters, it gets people off of things that are pie in the sky and drives them back to it. So as you're looking at a multi-use site like this or any others, it gives you a sense of, yes, this much retail, this much commercial, this much residential, this is the kind of parking you're going to need to support it. You can have this kind of hospitality. That all of that is just stuff that's usually, including here in Carmel, outside of our kin. We don't know those things. And that's really the value to the partnership with Hunden.
Great leadership means being intentional about having a vision. So you could say, what does the market bear for, a bunch of uses on a big site? But that also could be pretty milquetoast boring at the end of the day and just check some boxes. Or it could be a transformational anchor node of more development. And I think you and the mayor gave us some indication that you really wanted this to be sort of a new anchor that would connect somehow, some way through water or trails to the Midtown and downtown core, as well as then to the west side along US 31. So what was sort of the directive? And then I'll turn it to Steve to talk about the process.
You're exactly right. This is not development of the lowest common denominator, right? That's not, certainly that can happen. And for communities that really don't have a lot of development opportunities, I certainly understand that. But that's not Carmel's situation. And so we do generally try to set a goal, and sometimes it's a reach goal, but it's things that we think will benefit the community, that kind of connectivity. We've seen the benefit of connectivity through our trails and multi-use paths throughout the city for years and years and years. So that's certainly something that we want. The site we're talking about today has large water retention. In the 80s, that just meant a big pond. In this decade, there are different ways to activate that and make that more meaningful. And so that's an opportunity that we're focused on. Gathering spaces, public spaces, activation at the ground level, all things that were important. If it was just filling the space with something, that would be a very different conversation. But you're exactly right. The mayor's vision was this can be something so much more. We can turn these gray fields of parking lots into truly productive, additive, inspiring areas. We started calling CNO the next great Carmel neighborhood, because we really think that this can be the next great neighborhood in the city of Carmel and be so additive yet linked to those current areas that exist in our community that are so important.
Yeah, so CNO, Carmel's next opportunity.
There you go.
So boom. Put that on your bumper sticker. Development isn't a straight line, especially when it comes to complex development that's difficult. It also often doubles back on itself and iterates as it goes, and it gets more refined and thoughtful as you go, and that helps. And yet sometimes it seems frustrating, but if you didn't do those things, you wouldn't end up with the project that you end up having. And by the way, the story's not done being written, and so you're hearing this sort of midstream, mid-sausage making. But just to lay the groundwork, does CNO still own that as of February of 2026? Do they still own the ground and the buildings?
Yeah, the buildings and the grounds are all privately held, not in the city's ownership or control. So the company retains ownership.
Right. And so that adds another layer of complexity because you don't necessarily control your destiny. You have a private owner that is looking for the city's help to manage some things. So you're doing your best, given the fact that you're not fee simple owner of that. And so they had actually gone through a bit of an RFPQ process to get some development proposals that then the kitchen cabinet looked at and said, well, we like some things, we don't like some other things. That's when it seemed like you said, we really need somebody like Hunden to come in and assess this for real so that we're not sort of like guessing here, because it was admittedly the proposals they received were not necessarily things that could just be executed.
Yeah, I think the proposals that were in response to an offering that was done by the owner, right, and their representation certainly were interesting and represented good efforts by the firms that put them forward. They just didn't. They didn't strike what I think we were entirely hoping for. And I think out of that, we needed to put some words to what that meant, right? We needed to sort of have a better vocabulary about, okay, if not this, then what? And Hunden was particularly helpful in that by engaging you all. The art of what is possible came into much more clearer focus for us rather than just the developer side product, which again wasn't bad. It just probably wasn't quite right either.
Right. So then we kind of took a step back, and then Steve, you put together a team with others beyond Hunden Partners to take a look at this. So talk about your approach on behalf of the firm and the city of Carmel to assessing this big opportunity.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I do want to pick up on is a comment Nick made, which is that Carmel, Indiana sits atop most any list of sort of great communities and cities to live. The point that I'm going to make, that doesn't just happen by chance. It's intentional actions on the part of city leadership. And so that was important. I mean, we as a firm care a whole lot about placemaking, and that's really about just making wonderful communities for people to live in, play, work, and sort of live their lives. That commitment from Carmel was important as we started looking at things. And so, Rob, you talked about how things are iterative. And so these developments need to exist in the real world. There's a real estate market. So one of the things we did is a market and feasibility analysis, and we looked at the array of uses and how they might function at that site in that sort of particular market. There were also some uses that we looked at, meeting facilities, destination, hotels with conference and other facilities related to it. That's more about driving visitation. That's sort of beyond just a narrow look at a particular piece of real estate. So we looked at all of that. We then worked with a planning firm to help give that shape. And so the whole point of this is trying to find the intersection between what works from a market standpoint, what responds to the needs of the community, what makes for a great place, a great public place. And that's not always just a purely sort of financial transaction between two developers. That's often how you end up with development patterns throughout the suburbs that no one is all that excited about. And so I applaud Carmel and their approach. And so what we were able to do is help give shape and vision to what that might be, and also provide some guidance as to how to implement that as well.
In addition to the standard mix of commercial uses, there was also the potential for residential. There was also the potential and sort of an idea that the mayor had for an international events center of some sort. And that also dovetailed off of work we had been doing for about 3 to 4 years prior with Hamilton County Tourism, which had identified a gap need and or opportunity for function space, either a conference center, convention center, or large, robust sort of conference hotel to be developed, because there was the Indiana Convention Center downtown Indianapolis, which is top 15 in the country. It's not doing smaller project or events anymore, and there's nothing outside of that really in the suburbs, especially the northern suburbs, which are the most populous and prosperous and have the most office space for corporate users. There was really no place for them to have events. So talk about the investigation beyond just standard uses to some of those specialty uses.
So I'm going to talk about the program for an event facility. I mean, it's easy to say we want a place to hold events, but it's really important to pick the size, the market that you're going to compete in. And so we looked holistically at the entire marketplace. You had talked about, the Indianapolis Convention Center in downtown Indianapolis. We looked at other meeting and event facilities throughout the market and really focused on a size that would fulfill and meet a need in the marketplace. And that's a really important part of really establishing just a building block of what the project is. And that then helps give you a sense of size and how that then integrates with the adjacent development. So all of that is connected and tied together.
And so Nick, you were going to say something about that part of the effort.
Yeah, I remember very well when I started with the city of Carmel. One of the first, maybe the first 2 weeks, I went to a conference in Houston, and you were there, Rob, and we got to get reconnected. And in addition, the former CEO of Hamilton County Tourism was there, and I was getting a chance to meet her. And I remember just asking sort of the question, because I had been kind of looking at maps and just trying to get a lay of the land. I'm obviously from Central Indiana and have been for a long time, so I know the power of the Indiana Convention Center. And I said something along the lines of, has there ever been a discussion about a conference or convention center? And she looked at me and she said, we have a report about that. And I was like, you do? And she said, yeah, I'll send it to you. And it was that first countywide report. And that was really a light bulb moment for me, right? Because intuitively, I thought there might be something there. Carmel doesn't seem to have it. Then I get this report, right? Fully vetted, looked at all the comparables, looked at the demand, looked at each individual market within Hamilton County, of which Carmel's just one, and came to the conclusion that Carmel generally could be a reasonable location for something like that. Well, that was a terrific springboard, right? So then fast forward, and we're talking about a multi-acre, 60 to 80 acre site. We're seeking to reuse, create a district, have lots of engagement. And our community, we've heard certainly the corporate sector say, man, we could really use something like this. Calling back on that report, it seemed just sort of perfect to say, let's marry the data that was done there and zero it in and say, if Carmel generally is a reasonable location, is this location within Carmel a reasonable location, and marry that up with those use cases on everything else for this. And it really added to the kind of rigor of the document and frankly, the value of the document, because it told us all those things, Steve, that you're talking about. You can't just put a box up and hope people come. It's got to be designed in such a way that you're targeting a specific mix of things that are actually going to be available in your market and functional for the site, as well as financially viable. So it took sort of all the stuff that we don't understand that you all do in the business and zeroed it in and put it on a specific site to say, yes, it could work here. It was tremendous. It really was.
Well, thank you. And it's always gratifying to be able to move through a process from concept through delivery. And we're midway through and along for the ride, which is great, and leading you all in a smart direction. So before we get to the end of the story, or the current status of where this story is, we're going to take a brief pause and go to one of our favorite segments. This is our quick fire Q&A. It's a chance for our audience to know you and Carmel, Indiana a little bit better. So are you ready to spill?
Sure, let's do it.
Do you have a favorite happy hour spot in Carmel, Indiana?
1933 Lounge, brand new on Range Line, which is if we have Main Street and the corner of Main and Main, it's just south of there. Owned by and developed by the St. Elmo Group, which is an institution here in Central Indiana. It's a beautiful place, great for an after work drink.
Favorite art and cultural venue?
Ooh, I think I would say the Carmel Palladium, developed in conjunction with the city and by the city a number of years ago. I want to say 15 or so years ago. It's a tremendous venue. People who come to Carmel are always surprised by how beautiful it is, both inside and outside. And it's just a terrific place to see a show.
Favorite sports venue?
Sports is not the backbone of Carmel. Obviously, at the high school level, we have one of the largest high schools in the state. And so those sports venues are certainly strong, but we do not really participate in the sports game in the same way as some of our neighbors, and certainly Indianapolis to the south. So I don't know if I have a favorite sports venue.
But you're adjacent to Westfield, which has Grand Park.
Yeah, Grand Park is terrific. When I was in a previous life, I was there for the opening of what is now Gamebridge. It used to be Conseco. So I got to attend opening night there. That's a tremendous facility. And Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis as well. In a previous life, I was there for the opening of that. So I do have some favorites, not necessarily here in Carmel.
And one thing I'll mention, all of your hotels along the Meridian Corridor do benefit from all those sports venues, both north and south. So, yeah, fantastic. Okay, do you have a favorite coffee shop?
Yes, I have a favorite spot. It's Indy Coffee Roasters in North End here in Carmel. Terrific spot, great vibe. It's easy to camp out and have good conversations there.
How about a favorite outdoor spot?
Your favorite outdoor spot is the Monon. Running the full length of our city, north to south, starts way far south in downtown Indianapolis and goes well north of us through Westfield. Terrific Rails to Trail program, one of the very first ones in Indiana. And we have built it out like no other. So it's a beautiful outdoor amenity in Carmel.
And how about a favorite dinner reservation?
That changes over time, right? You sort of go through cycles. But I would say Monterey on Main Street is a favorite of mine. Seafood in Indiana don't necessarily always go hand in hand, but they always get it right. And it's a terrific spot.
I've heard great things about it. Haven't been, but I know Steve.
I have. It's
Absolutely,
an awesome place.
I think I had to approve that receipt. And then how about your favorite citywide or annual event?
Carmel Fest, 2 days. It's so big it can't be confined into just the 4th of July, right? So it's a 2-day celebration. Everybody seemingly in the city of Carmel comes out. We shut down roads. It's obviously a parade. There's fireworks, but there's booths, there's vendors. It feels like you are in the most welcoming community in America.
So now that we know you and your destination a little bit better, let's jump back in. Okay, so now we're going to catch up with where the CNO sort of process is at this time. So we finished our work and answered some key questions that then really had the city leadership and stakeholders really have to make some interesting choices or start to really think through next steps and choices. So where did we end up with the program, generally speaking, and then what were sort of the big data points that we gave to the city of Carmel, and then they had to sort of think through that?
So from a program standpoint, we outline sort of a collection of a mix of uses, residential, retail, office, that could work in the community. We identified a size for an event venue, the corresponding hotel that would go with it. I think the other thing that was an important data point that we arrived at is some sense of what the public investment might be. That tends to be a really important element to help communities and cities move forward, so that there's a realization that in order to accomplish this, there will need to be some public investment that happens.
Right. So up until this point, Nick, there were a lot of pretty pictures from different development teams that had come at you. There was a vision that the mayor had that needed some definition, and then dollar signs attached to that, which then caused some real, I remember there was a meeting with donuts that we had with the mayor and some city council folks and you all, and sort of take us through kind of that sort of realization, the conversations, and then kind of where things are headed next.
Yeah, we thought the donuts would help the meeting, but I don't recall them doing their job.
No.
You're exactly right, Steve. Putting the dollars to it is really a critical step, because having all of these things talked about and promoted as goals or opportunities, we could do this or we could do that, is terrific in the abstract. But until the dollars get attached to it, it doesn't particularly mean anything. And then once the dollars get attached to it, then that's where the orders, right? The ordering has to happen. That's where you have to start saying, well, if this, then not that, and if this, then we can't have this other thing over here. It's pretty intense. It gets pretty intense pretty quickly, and certainly is difficult in the current moment we're living in here in Indiana. Is the economic landscape is changing. Obviously, the macro landscape is something we all deal with. What are interest rates? What's the cost of construction? What's the labor cost? Is 2x4s tripled in price? All of those sorts of things. But then the tax climate can change, and we've had a change here in Indiana, and that then affects kind of all the assumptions and all the things that maybe we've done in the past are all now differently impacted. And so the dollars really help focus the mind and the people around the table as to this is what we need to settle on, and these are the things we need to go after, because we can't have everything. So, what's really the most important part? So without the dollars, you just kind of keep this kind of circular in the clouds conversation.
Right. So now you're more realistic about what kind of needs to be determined on the next step. So, so the story continues, right? So at this point, where are we in the process?
At this point, CNO remains the owner of their site, and we remain interested in seeing terrific redevelopment, the next great Carmel neighborhood springing up out of the ground there.
How about some lessons learned? So, I mean, you've been doing this for 30 years or so, and you've been in Carmel now for a little while. So, how has working in the public and private sectors shaped the lessons you've learned about placemaking, economic and destination development? Are any big takeaways?
Yeah, I used to say when I was in the private sector and I would be working in a community I'd never worked in before in another state, right? You have to get up to speed pretty quickly. And okay, what are the tools in their toolbox? How's their process work? And I always likened it to ice cream, right? Economic development, particularly the tools around economic development, are like ice cream. It's all the same, but you can have 31 different flavors, and sort of how they nuance this or how they approach that is somewhat different, but the ideas that undergirds it are generally the same. And that's generally been my experience in communities, right? Every community is different. They all have their own ethos. They all have their own vibe as to what they want to be or what they have been, where they're going, or where they came from. But at the end of the day, there are places where people live, and they have to want to live there. Communities that are bleeding people are in a very different situation than communities that are attracting people. And you have to sort of recognize those differences and appreciate them, work through them. And I've learned that Carmel is a terrific place. Obviously, I grew up near here, and so I always knew that. But getting to work here, it's a terrific place with incredible standards and expectations. We sometimes refer to the work we do here as curation, right? We want to curate the experience for folks, give them great amenities, terrific events. Obviously, a great school system, great public services and public safety. That is what we strive to do. And if you do those things, our experience has been you're one of those cities that attracts people. You're one of those cities that grows. So, it's sort of been putting those pieces together that I've picked up along the way, and then seeing, okay, how does Carmel behave normally, and can we bring any of those things to bear here?
Also, you've had such a multifaceted career as an independent advisor, public, private sector, and all of that. You've got some free advice from old friends and colleagues in the industries that we both run around in over the years. But then at some point, you engage in an external third-party partner to assess things. What What's the advice on that? When's the right time to do that? Is it ever the right time to do it? Can you get away without doing it? What are your thoughts if you had to recommend to other communities?
Right. In this regard, communities are differently resourced in both financial resources and talent resources, right? You might have just the right combinations of Rob Hundens in your community that are looking to do something like this, and you don't need to necessarily go the formal engagement route. Or you might not have the resources, right? We had a terrific partnership with with Hamilton County Tourism as it relates to your work. So, those individual issues have to be navigated. But I think at the end of the day, going outside your organization to find content experts is usually pretty valuable, right? For 15 years, I was a consultant that people had to decide to spend money on. Right. And I took away from that experience. Generally, people hired consultants for one of two reasons, but sometimes both reasons at the same time. The first reason was specialized information. There was something that consultant knew that they themselves did not know. Their team didn't know it. It was so niche or emerging or whatever the case may be that it wasn't information that was possessed inside the organization. So they needed to get it on the outside. And that's, I think, the role that you all often fall into. The second is we need more oars in the water, right? For this period of time, we need more people working on this than we can throw at it internally. And so you bring in an outside firm. And again, sometimes the project is such you need both of those things. So I would say that as a community is looking at these challenges, if they are in one of those two camps, we need more oars in the water, or we need to understand these things that we don't know internally. That's the time to pick up the phone and figure out if there's an opportunity to work with a third party to solve that.
Very good.
And Nick, I actually wanted to follow up on another question, which is really about, you all are the public sector. You're engaging with the private sector for, to affect and positively, affect the outcomes of a development. Explain a little bit the logic and why that makes sense. And you had talked about just letting two private entities figure things out. So why does that make sense for Carmel? Why would that make sense for other communities? Because it's hard. It is hard work. It's a lot easier when you own the real estate.
Well, it's a lot easier when you own the real estate, but at the same time, there are a number of communities that they only want the private sector to be involved in, and they want to absolutely stay on the sidelines, right? And there's every spot in the middle. Rob might remember an old phrase from our former boss, Mayor Steve Goldsmith. That used to be, he was always striving for the city to operate better, faster, and cheaper. And many times you achieve that by those public-private partnerships, because the private sector is able to do things at scale or at speed, or with a lower cost basis, or whatever the case may be, to deliver better, faster, and cheaper. That imprinted on me at a young age, and so I've taken that forward. Now, in the terms of economic development, it's not to be afraid of P3s, right? Not to be afraid of opportunities where the public sector and the private sector come together and say, we have a joint interest here. We both want something. They want to develop a piece of ground in this case, and obviously bring a product to market and make money. We, on the other hand, want to curate our community. We want to have places for our residents to live, work, and play. And we want to, increase the tax base, right? Bring in more people who are going to buy more things and spend more money. So it's finding that alignment of interests and then acknowledging it and then working together. So I think P3s, those sorts of public-private partnerships, scare a lot of folks. But I think there's real value there when you think of it of alignment of interests.
And another comment or observation. So, Rob, you were sort of talking about when is the right time to engage outside resources. I think one of the things that's really important for communities looking to create a great place, understanding the market is really important. You can spend a lot of time dreaming and master planning, but understanding the real world economics, what it's going to take to put a development in place and to have some sense of what the costs are, that to me grounds projects in reality, and in the end will help advance them quicker. Communities will spend less time spinning their wheels, dreaming about things that they will never be able to afford.
100%. So, Nick, as we wrap up this portion, if you had a magic wand and money were no object, what would you magically make happen in Carmel, Indiana?
That's a great question. Certainly, I think we would have an outdoor amphitheater venue. We have been a benefit of our own success where our outdoor gathering spaces, most notably, our Chris Kendall goes back to one of those lists of the best in the country. That tops that list as well. It's space constrained. It is a victim of its success. So having more space to do those sorts of community opportunities would be a terrific thing for us to have. I also think the conference space. We just hear too often the inability of businesses that are located here in Carmel to bring their teams from around the country and actually then have those meetings in Carmel. And that always feels like a real miss. The mayor likes to point out the high school graduation doesn't occur in Carmel because we don't have a place large enough for it that's indoors. It can be at the football stadium, but if the weather's bad, you've got to leave Carmel to graduate. So it would be nice if one of those two things could happen.
Yeah, and what's interesting, having the magic wand with unlimited financial resources isn't necessarily the answer. Having some constraints forces communities, forces people to prioritize what really matters for the community, and sometimes you end up with a better project as a result.
100%. Yeah. And it forces that creativity and efficiency.
Yeah.
So, Nick, one of the things we like to ask folks on the Hunden Happy Hour podcast is, do you have a local nonprofit that is meaningful to you, that does something really unique that you'd like to share with our viewers?
Oh, that's a great question. There are a lot of great nonprofits in Carmel. The one that jumps to my mind is Children's TherAplay. It focuses on physical, occupational, and speech therapy by using animals, specifically horses. So kids with disabilities or those who have unique needs are able to receive physical, occupational, and speech therapy. And that movement that comes from being in and around and on horses is really an accelerator to that activity for them. So it's a great organization located on the west side of Carmel.
Okay, fantastic. And Hunden Partners is going to be delighted to make a donation to children'stheraplay.org. And so we look forward to supporting them in their efforts. And I'm so glad that you brought them to our attention and to the viewers.
Well, great. Thanks so much. I know that it'll be an investment well made. Thank you.
And thank you, Nick, for offering your insights. Steve, thank you again as well. And it's so meaningful because it is my hometown, and it's always been, I think, the City of Champions and such a great place. So it's amazing to see such great leadership continue forward and carry on that tradition of excellence. And I'm so glad that Hunden Partners has gotten to be a part of that. So thank you for joining us for another episode of Hunden Happy Hour, and we'll see you next time. Hunden Happy Hour is produced by Hunden Partners, hosted by Robin Hunden, co-host Steve Hammerly, recorded in the Hunden Partners offices in Chicago, Illinois.